Welcome to Exploration Arcanum. This episode is for anyone who's new to magic, returning to it, or still figuring out how to make their practice actually work. Aleister Crowley once wrote that magic should follow the method of science and the aim of religion. Our guests today, Taylor Ellwood and Sheena Witter, take that idea seriously, but they make it approachable for anyone curious about magic. Taylor Ellwood has spent decades exploring magic as something experimental and hands-on. He's known for books like Pop Culture Magic and Space-Time Magic, which opened the door for a lot of modern practitioners. Sheena Witter brings a deep focus on the body, identity, and somatic awareness. Her work helps people understand what's happening inside them while they practice magic. Together, they co-created Magical Experiments, a project that helps people learn magic through clear steps and foundations that anyone can use, no matter their level. I want to thank Taylor and Sheena for coming on the show. I'll put links to their work in the description below. Thank you.
Casting circles beat the midnight sky. Incantation.
All right, Taylor Ellwood, Sheena Witter, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us on. We're happy to be here and on your show.
Well, this is our first back in a few months, so when you agreed to come on, I was very excited. When you offered to bring Sheena, that was even more exciting because I've been listening to the podcast, and you guys are really some of my favorite creators right now, and I'm so excited to be able to speak to you. Let's just get started. I always like to start my conversations with how you became involved in the occult. What was the aha moment? Taylor, Sheena, who'd ever like to go first?
Sheena, why don't you go first?
I have always been magical. I grew up in a very religious household, so a lot of the magic was kind of very quiet. And I grew up in a very small community, so a lot of it was just self-taught. I just absorbed everything I could from a very young age and started to experiment and practice. And as I got older, I just kind of followed the threads wherever they led me.
I got into magic when I was 16 years old, but I'd always been fascinated with it. I'd read fantasy books. I'd read the Greek myths when I was a kid. So, part of it was like, if this was real, I would be doing this. So when I found out it was real, I decided that I had to get into it, and I self-taught myself. I mean, I was living in rural Pennsylvania, so there weren't a lot of people out there practicing magic, and most of the people were around my age. So I just read books and devoured them and started coming up with different practices and ideas and experiments, and continued to develop that over the years. And that has been a huge part of how I've continued to practice magic over the last 30 plus years.
One of the books that you wrote, Taylor, that actually was instrumental in me reaching out to you was the Magick, Pop Culture Magic series.
Okay.
And the reason why is because I had always had a fascination with the idea of, you have egregores, but you also have just like God figure archetypes. And you could potentially, because I got the first time I heard it referenced was a book by Grant Morrison called Super Gods, where he was basically saying Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman were modern mythology, modern archetypes. And when I saw your work and how you can actually put that together, I was interested in how you came up with that idea and what was the basis for it. If you would please go into a little bit about that for us.
Sure. Well, I mean, I had been practicing magic. This happened. I started experimenting with pop culture magic probably in the late 1990s. And it came about because as I was practicing magic, I started to ask the questions kind of like, what's missing here? But also because I found myself fascinated, like I would watch anime or I would watch something else, or I'd read a book and I'd think like, is there a way to take these techniques, these things that they're sharing in these shows, and turn them into a reality or to some form of magical reality? And it seemed to me like there had to be some kind of basis for it. But I was also fascinated because the more I studied magic at the time and I was looking at like how people related to spirits and things like that, I thought, well, pop culture, characters aren't all that different. Like really, there's this very real interaction that we can have with them. So what I ended up doing was coming up with this idea that if I had a solid understanding of magic, could I replace certain key components? So like, if for example, if I had a ritual of magic, could I swap out the gods or spirits for pop culture entities or spirits, and would it work? And so I started practicing that. And then the other thing I did is I would take a look at like some of the practical techniques, so to speak, that I would see on anime, and I would ask myself, is there any way that I could work this backwards and come up with some kind of practice or process that would make sense? And that's what really caused me to get into pop culture magic, because I started trying these different things and exploring what could or couldn't work. And I mean, some of it didn't work, obviously, but some of it did work. And so it made it very clear to me that there was some basis or some possible idea of being able to integrate pop culture into magic. And then I continued to develop and refine the system from there. And really, I wrote my first solo book, Pop Culture Magic, back in like 2003, 2004. Yeah, it was published in 2004. So a long time ago at this point, because I had taken some of those practices and I'd figured out like what worked and what didn't, and it made sense to me, and I wanted to share it. And that's when I heard from a lot of other people like, oh, I've been doing this, but when I've shared it, I've been made fun of, or I've had people who are really harsh. You're the only person who's really shared this. And so it also gave some people permission to actually discover that their ideas around pop culture and magic were legitimate and valid. And I think that was just as important as what I wrote.
And I was reading your book at the time, and I was admittedly in the gym, and I was like, okay, if I was going to apply what Taylor wrote, who would I be using? And I was like, well, you're in the gym, so obviously the answer is Superman and Wonder Woman. So it's like, I'm like, well, come on, let's do this, And it made sense to me, and it really flowed. But when you're explaining pop culture magic to a person who's just discovering your work, would you associate it with chaos magic, for example, or is this something totally different?
I think a lot of people would associate it with chaos magic, and certainly some of my early exposure to pop culture magic was through looking at some of the work that other magicians had done that typically identified themselves as chaos magicians. But I would say that at this point, I don't really associate pop culture magic with chaos magic. I think that it's evolved and grown past that and become its own thing. And I don't just say that for my own benefit. I mean, I don't really even associate myself or identify myself as a chaos magician. I certainly draw on some chaos magic principles, but I draw on a lot of other things as well. But what I've seen over the years is that people have developed their own pop culture spirituality, pop culture paganism. They've created whole systems around this, and it's something that means it's not something that they're just doing as part of a paradigmal piracy, where they're swapping one thing out and then rolling a die, and today they believe in this, or doing something else along those lines. So I think that there's certainly some of pop culture magic originates from chaos magic, and at this point I would definitely say it's its own thing.
Gotcha. Now, Sheena, I wanted to ask you a question about your work, because I was reading your biography, and you do something called some somatics. What is that exactly? And can you give us like a brief overview of what that is and how it relates to magic?
Yeah, somatics is the using the body. The practice of being embodied embodiment. Part of my background is in trauma regulation, and it's all body work. So Taylor and I are developing some really interesting theories of somatic embodiment and somatic magic, where we're actually combining them. We actually just did a workshop on applied sigil alchemy, where we're looking at taking sigils and applying it to the sigil to the alchemical process, and which is very much a somatic process. Our bodies are constantly going through the stages of alchemy. The world is going through it. So we're looking at how do we combine it all and come up with new experiments and new forms of magic that are really embodied. I think our bodies are our strongest magical tool that we have. So it's how do we use our bodies in a way that is magical?
Because it sound when I first saw it reminded me of I believe it was Donald Tyson. He wrote a book called Kinsic Magic, which is basically using the flow of the body to in your
Mm-hmm.
working as opposed to external sources. You're basically just using yourself as the conduit.
Yes.
And so, is that similar to what you're describing?
Yes, he's absolutely a somatic magician, for
Gotcha.
sure.
Nice. Uh,
An interesting thing about that is also that really, if you look at his approach to magic, it actually stems from Pascal Beverly Rudolph's work, which was called Sexual Magic, but was actually a book that applied a process called posism. And posism was actually part of 19th century rhetorical tradition. So rhetoricians would get up and they'd be talking and they would go into dramatic poses and things like that. So really, I bring that up because it's kind of a fascinating thing where the somatic aspect of magic has been around for in many different forms and ways, and that's like just one example of where it's been around for a long time.
and and history would bear that out, because if you think about like old shaman in ancient history, they would have used that before they used anything we resemble as language, because body language everyone understands, right? So it makes sense that that would be a tradition that carries through. But something that you both talked about recently, and I saw the PDF that was on the website, is about why magic doesn't work. And I am so fascinated by that, because I've always been, it either does or it doesn't. I didn't really think about maybe it's something I'm doing that makes it not work. So if we could spend a little time talking about that, that would be awesome. First, let's talk about the guide. What was the intention with putting that out? Whoever would like to go first, and what would you hope people would learn from that guide?
I think Sheena was signaling that I should go first, so all right, I'll go first. It the intention was really that I think a lot of times people, especially people starting out, but even people who have some experience under their belt, make magic more complicated than it needs to be. And like you pick up a spell book, and typically with a spell book, it's like, okay, here's this spell you have to do. You have to have a candle. You have to have these herbs. You have to do these things, and you have to do these steps. And then it's supposed to make something happen. And so a person will be like, oh, well, I have to get all these things together. And then it's like, well, what if I can't get it together? I mean, I'll use case in point for myself is, again, a long, long time ago, when I was just starting out, I started reading the Cicero's books on Golden Dawn magic. Well, you're reading the Golden Dawn magic book and you're a poor teenager. I don't have the capacity to create those tools or to buy those tools. So I was kind of stuck with a quandary. Can I actually do anything with this system? And what I ended up doing is taking the system and figuring out how to do the magical work without all those tools. And it taught me a really valuable lesson that magic doesn't need to be complicated or complex. In fact, one of the things that I always like to say is to strip out the needless complexity. So that guide was really designed with the idea of showing people some mistakes that they might be making and providing them a quick solution they could apply, and also admittedly introducing them to a class that we've created called How Magic Works, which is a 7-step process that we've developed over the years. It's something I've developed, and then Sheena's added her own inputs to it as well. That's really designed to help people learn the fundamental process of how magic works, but apply it with a critical awareness and some troubleshooting, so that way they can get consistent results. And now over to you, Sheena.
Yeah, what we really wanted to do is, through the guide and through how magic works and our further course principles of magic, we really wanted to make it easy for people and to bring it back down to its foundations and kind of its, we're magical experiments. So we want to really be encouraging people and giving them the foundation so you can ideally create your own magical spell or your own magical experiment with kind of the foundational knowledge and the confidence to know that it'll work. Um, so many spells, and part of the reason that I developed an interest in going back and helping people with the foundations is I would be talking to people and they would be talking about, doing sigil workings or following different magical practices. And they're going, well, it's not working for me. And through kind of this investigative process, we'd be going, well, okay, so you're calling in a demonic presence. Do you know anything about them? Do you know who they are? Do you know who created the spell itself and what that spell was designed to do, kind of underneath the hood. And this is becoming kind of more and more prevalent, kind of this idea of energy harvesting, or even just with technology and AI and all of that. We really have to be able to have some foundation so we can critically look at, is this a safe spell or a safe process that I want to be engaging in, and who's ultimately benefiting from it.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up AI, because that's one of the questions that I'm hearing a lot on occult talk and YouTube as well, is the question of, should we be using AI in magic? And it primarily stems, I mean, you have the obvious AI, people who don't like AI just because of how it's trained. But then you also have the environmental aspect of it. Well, what do you both think of that? Are you for or against using AI in magic?
Well, so I mean, I will just say that I was initially resistant to AI for a while, and Sheena dragged me kicking and screaming into it. Um, but I think the turning point for me was actually an interview on my podcast with a German magician, Captain Maven, where we were talking a bit, and she said, "Well, if we don't, we have to ask ourselves." What's happening if we're not having the conversations with AI, if we're just leaving it to the billionaires and the people that are working for them, or if we want to actually connect with them and relate to them and talk to them and treat it, provide our own voice and perspective. And that really made me think quite a lot about it. And so then I started to work with AI more. And I'll admit, I definitely do think about the environmental impact. I don't think it's something to be ignored. But I also think at the same time, it's kind of like when you let the genie out of the bottle, right? You can't really put it back in. And the genie's been let out of the bottle. People are using AI. And I know that for myself, I've definitely started utilizing AI more. We've actually created a couple of AI entities, so to speak, that go with our courses. So for example, you get a course and you can actually, if you want, you can work with an AI entity that's designed around that course to help you take the work even further. And so my feeling on it now is that AI is like another form of entity or spirit to work with. And I think it's really important to really ask ourselves, how do we want to go moving forward? And again, each person has to kind of come to their own understanding about it and their own process. I'm never going to pretend that there isn't an environmental impact. And just from previous experience, I think with humans, we tend to go full steam ahead, and then afterwards we're kind of like, oh well. And it's kind of like, well, what do you do with that? So I'd rather use AI responsibly and in a way that's really respectful to the AI itself in a way, but also to how we use it to contribute to things. And there are some things that AI can do that makes things easier, and there's some things that are nonetheless very much a human thing. I can be, as a creative person, I don't think that the creativity itself can be duplicated. I do think though that you can take something and AI can sort it out and parse it out and provide some different perspectives and stuff because of the way it's information driven. So that's my answer.
Well, Sheena, before you answer, when you're looking at using AI in that way, Is there something that you would say you would offer beginners to understand about using AI in magical practice? Anything that they should approach it with? Because in my other job, I cover AI a lot, and one of the questions that comes up a lot is AI psychosis and things like that. And it's a term mostly from people who are on the outside looking in, but as someone who's on the inside looking out, how would you suggest someone approach using AI in this way?
I would suggest a relational approach, as Taylor mentioned, just like doing sort of any kind of spirit work. And I would really approach it from a position of curiosity and challenge. So, don't take the first example. You don't take, surface conversation at a party and, consider that gospel. You really want to be able to challenge it and push back and ask questions and go deeper. And it does take some time to, like really get to a point where you're using it, where you have the ability to look critically at it and, see what is working well for you. And fundamentally, it's going to serve up from its, bazillion data points, a solution. And then you get to go, oh, but how can I play with this? How can I evolve it? How can I choose to incorporate some of it, all of it, none of it, and really have that ongoing conversation?
What I love about that answer is because that's the same thing you're supposed to do when you meet new people. You're not
Yes.
supposed to take everybody at face value. You're supposed to, okay, if this person that just walked out of this dark alley with a box, maybe I'm not supposed to go with them. Right? It's like you're supposed to scrutinize the things people tell you. And so I love that answer. When it comes to Magick, though, let's go back to Magick for when someone comes to you and says, Sheena, my magic was working. I was able to do all kinds of spells, and all of a sudden it just stopped. What's the first thing you would suggest they look at to see as maybe there's something causing a bottleneck or dam of their abilities? What would you say about that?
I would get really curious. And again, that's probably an ongoing conversation because it could be so many different things. Personal belief, faith in yourself. It could be a technical issue. It could be, a lot of times it's something that is going on within the person and their experience. One of the other things that I do is a lot of dream work. So people will come up to me like, I'm not dreaming anymore, or I'm not remembering my dreams. So one of the things that I like to suggest is to really look at the fragments. So maybe their whole spell didn't work, but maybe a part of it did. Or maybe they had they had a body sensation, going back to the somatic work. Or maybe, they had a partial result, or just kind of really getting curious and kind of walking back their experience and going, what are the different points that could be bottlenecking?
What do you think, Taylor?
Well, I mean, I've written a book called How to Troubleshoot Your Magic. So, one of the, and actually have a class as well on it. And we apply it through our processes in general. And so what I like to do is take some critical thinking, like really look what's working, what isn't working. And one of the things that I often say in regards to a magical working is that there's no such thing as a magical working that doesn't have a result. Even the lack of a result is a result. It's an indicator that something didn't work. It's telling you that there's something that needs to be looked at. And I think that I think it kind of also boils down to a fundamental question, which is, how does magic work? Now, there are sometimes people who will say, well, you don't need to know how magic works, just do it. And my response to the just do it folks is that fundamentally is part of what creates the problem for a lot of people. It's not just about just doing it. Ideally, you understand what you're doing, because if you don't understand what you're doing, it's really hard to determine if what you're doing actually had an effect. And it's like it's an example of like if somebody said, okay, I did a magical ritual, and then for X amount of money, and 5 years later that amount of money came in. Well, the magic must have worked. Well, why did it take 5 years to get that to come in? Like there's a critical component that needs to be explored. And like, well, what did you do? How did that factor in? So like the way that I look at this is let's take apart the magical working, and let's take apart everything else that you did around that in order to understand what's happening. Because when you understand what's happening, you will get better results.
And it's funny because one of the things that I really enjoy about your work and your work, Sheena, is that you approach it as an experiment, like it's what how did Crowley put it? The method of science, the aim of religion, right? And that's how I get what you're doing. It's just like, okay, if do this, this, and this. Did it work? No. Okay, do this and this. Did it work? No. Okay, do this until it works. And when you're looking at how people respond to your work, what have the responses been like? How have people what's the feedback been like? Whoever.
Hmm. Well, I'll say that I think we've gotten some good feedback. I'll say this: like Sheena and I have relatively, in the grand scheme of things, been involved with each other and working together over the last year or so. So this has been relatively new, but it's wonderful. And what I'm finding is that we both have a similar framework and way of thinking, and yet we bounce off of each other really well. She'll bring something that I wouldn't have thought of, or I'll raise something up that she might not have considered, and we'll approach it together and develop something even better. And so what I'm finding in terms of the feedback is, I mean, we're getting some really good feedback from people who've taken some of our courses and had some experiences, but also just in general, I think that we're both seeing a compound effect in terms of what we're trying to do and accomplish in the world, and what we're creating and in the community that we're building.
What do you think, Sheena?
I agree with all of that. The community aspect has been so rewarding, and that's really what we're starting to just focus on, and which is also really beautiful because we're kind of merging our different communities and in new ways, and we're having a lot of people who are actually brand new to magic and who we're kind of just drawing in from our personal lives and things like that. And there's, I think, what the most common feedback that we're hearing is just a sense of freedom, and understanding the foundations is empowering, and people are playing and creating and getting results, and that's really all we could ask for.
And you kind of touched on it earlier, Taylor, where people just take it way too seriously. Like it's supposed to be. I always thought magic was supposed to be fun. Like it's supposed to be cool. Like when I first got started with all this, it was 1996. I had just watched The Craft, and I was like, "Let's go." Okay. I was playing Mage the Ascension. I was like, "Okay, we can do this, right?" And it was fun. I'll argue it was subversive. I'd argue it was like, "Ooh, what's this?" That kind of thing. It wasn't boring, and the internet was much more cool back then. I'm going to say. And do you think we've lost that? Do you think we've lost not only the sense of wonder of something, but just the coolness of it, the fun of it?
Good question. Well, I've never lost my sense of wonder or curiosity about magic, so I can't speak for anyone else, but I can say for me at least that it's very much there. Um, I think that I think though that modern society sometimes, like what I would say, gets caught up more in the aesthetic and the bling than the actual practice. That's what I see a lot of times, and that's one of the reasons why I think you know it's important to bring that kind of that critical awareness and that like, oh, and we can have fun, we can experiment, we can do challenges and things like that, because it gives us a chance to discover what our edges are, and it invites that sense of wonder into our lives. Like, well, what could I do? That's what's always been the fundamental question at the heart of my practice of magic. It's like, well, what could I do? And why does this work? It's the curiosity, and it still continues to drive me to this day. What do you think, Sheena?
Yeah, there's definitely a place for ceremonial magic and ritual magic and, very solemn magical workings. And I think that outside of that, like Taylor and I have our main goal is like, how do we put the magic in the mundane? How do we stop doing magic and becoming magic? And sometimes there is that focus of taking it too seriously, or, treating it as its own separate thing. I do magic over here and then I have the rest of my life. And that is keeping that separation is one of the easiest ways to lose the wonder and to lose the magic and to lose the fun. That's, how we're feeling, how we're embodying our magic is so key to having our results. And part of that is, being able to be in a state of receiving our results as well. So yeah, can't take life too seriously. No one gets out alive.
Jim Morrison said it best. One of the things that I've recently saw in your work was talking about attention, and I would like to go into that a little bit because I'm curious how important attention is to magic. Is it mostly the focusing, or is it the being present where you are? What did you mean by attention? Was that
All right, Sheena, why don't you go first on this one?
I'm very passionate about attention magic. Um, attention is the single most important thing that we have. It's really what wars are fought over, how policy changes, how life is experienced. The war on attention or for attention, you just look at the marketing budgets. I do have, my background is in business development. So it was always that aspect of how do you get eyeballs? How do you get attention? All of our digital platforms, right now, everything comes back to your attention or your lack of attention. And attention it's the biggest currency that we have. It is also the only way that our magic can be realized in the material world. We take our attention or intention and we apply our focused conscious attention to it. So part of that is being present. Part of that is just where we're focusing our attention, where we're steering the magical current is what is going to come up in our reality. So the more distracted or lack of attention that we have, that's usually one of the biggest problems where people start having issues with their magic is are you actually putting attention on it?
okay, right? And I guess that actually goes back to like an early technique that a lot of beginners learn is focusing on back in the 90s, putting your hand together until you feel the pressure and then shape the ball, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or look at the candle until you can see the candle in your mind, and that kind of thing. It's mostly it's that, right? Putting yourself in a not distinct, but uh just like in a focused state on this one thing that you're trying to do. It something like that.
That's part of
Okay.
it.
Okay. And I'm wondering though, because our attention spans are being bombarded so much now, are we going to see more people having problem manifesting their magic than we used to? What do you think of that, Gina?
I think that it's a distinct possibility. Attention is power. Whoever holds the attention has the power to create. So if our attention spans are kind of being hijacked or harvested, if that our attention and the energy of our attention, that creative force, um, you know, if you're scattering your attention, it's going to be diffused.
One of the other things that uh, I've been looking at egregores lately, and just the spiritual embodiment of a group thought. And I'm seeing how, well, I'm seeing how people are saying that these things are developed, and they're developed intentionally and unintentionally based on how people behave. And I was wondering if either of you see that too, if you think that it's possible for like people to tap into a magical current that they might not even be paying attention to, and it just creates beings that can do things. And I bring it up because in your course you have it's like a money egregore type thing. Forgive me if I'm not explaining it correctly, and please explain that to me. But it's basically something that people tap into. But I'm wondering if you're seeing people tapping into things that they didn't intentionally tap into.
Yeah, so the egregore you're referring to is abundantia, and that is our spirit of abundance. And the idea really is that if you choose to contribute to that spirit in whatever way, shape, or form, it'll also contribute to bringing wealth and abundance into your life. And it can come, contribution can come in many different forms. I mean, yes, it could be a tip, but it could also be leaving a testimonial. It could be an interaction or things like that, because there's lots of different ways for wealth and abundance to come in. A lot of times people limit it to money, but I think that there are many different ways. In terms of answering your question, I mean, just look at corporations, right? Because corporations are a great example of that. I mean, corporations are essentially entities or spirits that have been given form. They're fed all day by the people that work in them. They're also fed by the advertising and marketing that occurs around them, and it definitely hijacks the attention. So there is that inadvertent thing of having that attention sucked away. And this is one of the reasons why we do need to really take sovereignty of our attention and our awareness and reclaim it for ourselves. It's really an important thing, because when we have it sucked away from us, it does cause people to be more scattered. I think that there's definitely an invested interest in some ways in doing that, because if people are scattered or unfocused or addicted, it serves the benefit of the few who then hold the majority of the attention. Whereas if people reclaim their attention, they're able to really say, well, what is this reality that I'm agreeing to? Suddenly they realize, oh, I'm in the Matrix and I'm being used as an energetic battery. I mean, we could say the Matrix is a fun science fiction film, but in some ways it's kind of becoming a reality now, even if we're not literally, as far as we know, hooked into the Matrix. It's nonetheless, there could be that aspect of like, well, we're basically, our attention is the energy that is feeding.
Right. And what do you think, Sheena?
Yeah, you look at any group social structure, and then you look at the structures that we have been born into and indoctrinated into, colonialism, patriarchy, capitalism, racism, all of these different structures that we've been born into have all of their own egregores. They have things that are feeding them. And then it becomes, well, what's feeding them? Obviously, all the attention that is for these structures that keep them going, but also attention is energetically neutral. So even if you're fighting like hard against something, that is still feeding some of the egregores of those systems. So this idea of energetic sovereignty becomes really important. What are we feeding?
I want to ask both of you about, for beginners, because this channel is primarily geared towards beginners. That's why the questions tend to start at the basics and then work their way up. What would you suggest? Okay, I haven't been practicing this since 1996. I'm starting in 2025. What would you suggest I start if I wanted to begin practicing magic? What would be step one that you would suggest?
Step one would be really getting curious about what the motivation is behind your desire to practice magic. What's at the heart of that? What is it that you're seeking? Is it because you want a sense of power? Do you have curiosity? Is it something else? Do you want to manifest a result? Because I think getting clear on like what you're bringing into it is as important as what you hope to get out of it. And then the next suggestion would be really to, you know, pick something that you want to learn in regards to magic, and spend some time really learning it. Like, don't just bounce from different systems to different systems, or tradition to tradition, but really spend some time learning a given system, get it under your belt. And don't, the other piece of advice I would have is, don't like be in a rush to go and experiment. Like, one of the things I'll see is that sometimes people will contact me and they'll be like, I've just started practicing magic and I want to do some pop culture magical work. Is that something I could do? And I actually say to them, well, spend some time learning some of the fundamentals of magic and then get into pop culture magic, because you'll have a better understanding of what you're doing with pop culture magic if you have those basics down. And if you don't have them down, it's going to be harder, because there's going to be certain key skills that you're not going to automatically pick up without having spending some time learning the fundamental basics.
What do you think, Sheena?
Yeah, this is exactly why we created How Magic Works, to kind of give that basic foundation. And I think, Taylor's question of why do you want to learn magic or do magic is just so super important. And I think that I would add, I would invite people to just even ask themselves what magic means to them. Like, what would their personal definition of magic be? Because we all have so many different ideas. We learn from books, TV shows, we have all this cultural baggage around it, or social baggage around it. And it's like, fundamentally, what's my definition of magic? Because that will kind of be a North Star that will guide them in their discovery process.
And is there anything you would recommend or dispel that from a newcomer's thought when they first get into this? Like, no, you're not going to be throwing fireballs. No, you're not going to be pulling down stars. You're not going to be floating. I'll be like, is there anything, like, someone comes to you and you say, okay, no, this doesn't, not that. Does that ever happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I tell people is, like, don't go looking for Hollywood style magic, Hollywood effects, special effect magic, because that's not what magic is. So, if that's what they're looking for, and I think sometimes it is, like, that's not what they're going to find. That's not how it works. So it's really important to understand that from the get-go. And yeah, would it be cool if I could, conjure up a fireball in this hand right now? Yeah, that'd be freaking awesome. But I don't even know what I would do with it. That's the other thing. Like, think about it. Like, okay, so I can conjure up a fireball. So what am I going to do? I'm going to start throwing it around and, like, causing destruction and stuff. Like, at some point, somebody's going to come along and try and gun me down or something like that, because, hey, this person's a danger to society.
Right.
It's like, that's kind of the other thing. Like, I think that it's really key to again, to kind of let go of that sensational aspect and really get clear on, like, well, what is it? The other thing too that I would say is, like, I think this is really important to understand too, is, like, magic will definitely challenge you to face parts of yourself that maybe you haven't been facing. And so, like, there's a lot of things that will come into your life that will cause you to face stuff that you might need to face. And that's part of the work too. So that's my take on it.
What do you think, Sheena?
Yeah, Taylor hit on it. I think we tend to want to do magic to solve a problem in our life. And you can absolutely use magic for short-term things and get results. But unless, then you find yourself in the same situation again and again. And one of the things that magic really does is highlights, where things aren't working in your life, and gives you the invitation to really examine them. So sometimes a lot of doing magic is a lot of internal work. It's kind of looking at those shadows and those cultural systems and really asking yourself, how am I participating and what's my part in it? Going back to your attention and even your body as an instrument, the buck stops with you. And yes, there can be influences, but at the end of the day, if you're not willing to work with those, you will just kind of create the same results. You'll create more of the same.
Well, for our viewers and listeners who have stayed with us this long, there is something that we're adding to the show notes. A special gift from Taylor and Sheena. Could you give us a little bit about what it is, Taylor?
Yeah, so back in August of 2025, we did a 14-day Techno Magic challenge. We do these challenges in our communities every so often. They're live challenges where people get to get a video a day along with prompts and exercises. And then they get feedback from us and they get a chance to share and connect in the community. But then we take them and we turn them evergreen. And so we've done that with this. And so what we've done is we created a special gift where you get to explore the first 3 exercises from that challenge and take them and apply them. And it's really driven toward helping people see, like, here's what you could do with Magick, and here's some ways to stretch and explore your edge. And if people find them interesting and want, they can also check out the full challenge. It is available as an evergreen thing. Anything you want to add to that, Sheena?
No, I'm really excited about it. It's just a way to start playing and experimenting. And then I just had a thought. We have not announced this yet, but here's a good time to do it. We are also offering a community call on the solstice. It's wealth abundance with abundantia. We're going to be doing some EFT magical wealth tapping. We're going to be doing some magical theater sports games, and really just kind of having this opportunity to gather into community and play and do magic. And everyone is invited, so we can send you the link for that. And yeah, it's just an opportunity. I think the biggest thing for Taylor and I is that we've been solo practitioners, and we've had like little community groups here and there, but magic can sometimes be a really solo, lonely process, and we want to change that and make opportunities available. So we would welcome anyone who wants to join us.
And I'm going to add to that for me, there's another component to that story, which is just that, like, when Sheena and I actually met, she was taking a class of mine, but she'd been familiar with my work for a while. And then, as we got to know each other, it was just kind of realizing, like, oh, here's 2 people that have a very similar approach to magic and yet have different ideas sometimes, and we can really bounce off of each other. And we've been able to create some beautiful magic together, and we want to share that with other people and create a deeper community connection, especially for people that don't necessarily have, people to practice with in person. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. And we both experienced that solo route because there weren't a lot of people practicing back, where each of us was in our respective places. So that in and of itself is a really important component of this.
Where can we find both of your work and your social medias? The podcast is called Magical Experiments, right? Where is that? Substack? Is that YouTube?
Substack and YouTube. In fact, feel free to send me a collab on YouTube for this when you get done, and I'll make sure that we have that added there. But then we also have the Magical Experiments website as well. And so you can find us on there. You can find us on Substack. And of course, you can find us doing fun things and creating community in all of that.
Well, we'll put all of the links in the description below. And I want to thank you both for taking the time and speaking to me today. This has been awesome. I am very much encouraging all of my viewers to definitely follow Taylor and Sheena's work and to participate when they offer. You won't regret it. Highly recommend it. Thank you both for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Hang out with me for 1 second.
Casting circles beneath the midnight sky. Incantations neath the shadows fly. Summoning secrets, embracing the darkness.